Welcome to Thoughtful Planning, the place where real conversation, expert insight, and a touch of humor meet to turn our end-of-life uncertainties into self-assurance. I'm your co-host, Santiago, a history buff and a big kid at heart.
And I'm Honey, your guide through the intricate dance of planning with care and a whole lot of warmth. Every week, we're here to turn those intimidating "are we ready" moments into confident "everything is under control" moments. Today's journey is one you won't want to miss. Welcome to Thoughtful Planning. I'm Honey.
And I'm Santiago.
Today, we have a really inspiring guest joining us. I met her virtually about 5 years ago through her free Facebook group called Lightbeamers, where she encourages everyone to share their story and shine their light.
Recently, our guest and her family faced some very challenging events. It started when her cousin, who's like a brother to her, was diagnosed with a serious condition and needed surgery. Then days later, her son also required emergency surgery. Within days, 2 people near and dear to her were in the hospital. And then shortly after that, when she thought she was all clear, her son had to go back in to the hospital for another surgery. So as you process all that, I want to pose our essential question to you. How can facing adversity inspire deeper action and thoughtful planning in your own life?
That's deep, babe. But that's not all. In her life, our guest has also faced other challenges like job loss and an IRS audit, experiences that further ignited her commitment to planning and reorganizing her life.
Okay, without further ado, April, thank you for joining us today. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your story?
Sure. Thank you for having me, both of you, Honey and Santiago. This is really a treat to be here with the two of you. So I am April Pertuis, and a lot of things I could tell you, but I think in context for this podcast, I'm been married to a college sweetheart. We have 2 kids, both are in high school. Our son just graduated high school, and we are entrepreneurs. Both of us run our own business. And so that adds a layer of complexity to things when you're running your own business. And we both have had our own businesses for quite some time. I've had my company called Lightbeamers for a little over 9 years now. We primarily help women tell their story is the gist of what we do. And my husband has an executive coaching and leadership training company. And he's had that company on his own for, about 14 years now. So that's a little bit about who we are and what we do in the world and kind of the chemical makeup of our family.
Cool.
Well, thank you for sharing. So can you start by sharing the story of your cousin's diagnosis and the impact it had on you and your family?
Yeah, this was very, very recent. Actually, it's still kind of an ongoing story, if you will. But about 6 weeks ago, I got a call on a Tuesday night from my mother, which my mother doesn't normally call me at night. And so when the phone rang, I knew that was odd. And so she told me that Brad, our cousin Brad, was going in for emergency surgery the next day for brain surgery. And even when she told me the news, his mother, my aunt, we call Babs, short for Barbara. And I thought she said Babs. I didn't hear Brad. I thought she said Babs, which made a little bit more sense because she's older and I could kind of process that in my brain at the time. And I was like, Aunt Babs is having brain surgery? And my mom's like, no, Brad, her son, which is my cousin, which even made it even harder to process because Brad is actually a couple of years younger than me. He's in the same stage of life as I am. He is married to his high school sweetheart. He has 2 kids. One of them is in college. One of them is in high school. So we're kind of navigating, stage of life around the same time frame. And he's never been sick. He's a health professional. He's a chiropractor. And so I just could not process what she was saying. But long story short, he had an episode and like a mini stroke, sent him to the hospital, and they realized he had a tumor on his brain. And under that kind of investigation of what was going on in his body, they found tumors all over his body, and we're calling it stage 4 cancer. So this is Tuesday night, and I go to the hospital. I clear my calendar immediately. I cancel all of my client calls, cancel anything that I had going on that day. And my sister and I, all of these family members live nearby. And we went to the hospital the next day to be with them while they sat in the waiting room. And Brad underwent pretty last minute emergency brain surgery, which is significant. You know, like if you think of all the surgeries to have, I feel like brain surgery is kind of one of the scariest ones. So that went well. He came through brain surgery well, which is good news. But it was sitting in that waiting room, it was sobering because I saw my cousin's wife and I could see the fear on her face. My cousin Brad is the solo provider for their family. And I just could see all the thoughts going. And she was even speaking some of these out loud, but not in detail. But I could just see and sense her fear of what in the world are we going to do if the worst happens, right? I don't think you can help but think about worst case scenarios. And by and large, I think kind of worst case scenarios are kind of good to explore, because if we're talking about planning, right, this is kind of the thing that does get you into action. It's not the way you want to get into action by any stretch of the imagination. However, it does make you think. And I know she was thinking about it that day, and it certainly made me think about it, both thinking about it for them and thinking about it, what would happen if this were me? What if this was my husband? What if it was me going in for emergency surgery? Is my family prepared? Do we have all of our ducks in a row? And so there was a lot of conversation that day between me and my cousins, you know, his brothers that were there. And we were kind of having a lot of sideline conversations about, do they have long-term disability insurance? Do they have short-term disability insurance? How much money do they have saved? Is Brad going to be able to recover without having to worry about going back to work? I mean, all of this was happening while he's in surgery. And so I came home that night, and this is now Wednesday night. I came home that night from a very long day and kind of an emotional day. And I just shared with my husband that, and we have already, which I'll share a little bit more too, we had already done a lot of planning because of some things we'd been through in our past. But it did make us pause and go, well, what else do we need to be doing? What else have we not done? Because, you know, as you guys know, and you're teaching on this show, planning is an ongoing event. You get started, but there's always more to do. And so we had gotten started, but it was a realization there was still more to do. So we started having conversations like, do we have short-term disability insurance? Do we have long-term disability insurance? Again, like I said, both of us are entrepreneurs. So we don't have a boss or a job or a company that's going to like potentially be there for us. I mean, even in today's corporate environment, I don't think you can rely on that, but we are the solo providers for our family. So it sparked a lot of conversation. What is interesting about this story is that night, Wednesday night, we go to bed and we wake up about 1 o'clock in the morning, now Thursday morning, to our son waking us up, doubled over in pain. And he was having some sort of medical episode, which eventually led us to the emergency room by 6 a.m. Thursday morning. And by 3 o'clock Thursday afternoon, he was in surgery for intestinal surgery. He had some bowel blockage, which was, he's 18 years old. He was 2 weeks away from graduating high school. He was in his last week of school and last week of classes. And everything, he's totally healthy, has never had any health issues, the whole 9 yards. And it was like so unexpected. And so it was an interesting dynamic because as they were right before they were taking him in for surgery, because he's 18, he had to sign all of the documents agreeing to the surgery and taking liability and responsibility for anesthesia. Again, as a parent, that's a very difficult thing to witness and realize, wow, we don't have control any longer.
Mm-hmm.
And also to try to make him understand what he was signing, what he was agreeing to. Now, luckily, we're still in a stage of his age frame where we kind of have his back right now, but we are at a stage that was very eye-opening that, wow, these are things that we need to start having, not that we haven't had some conversations with him about money and setting himself up with accounts and things like that. But we have life insurance and all that stuff on him, but we need to start having more of these conversations with him now that he's 18. And so it's just been a really eye-opening event that's happened in our lives over the last 6 weeks. And Santiago, you pointed out that even with my son's recovery, he had a setback and it sent him back to the hospital 3 weeks into his post-op recovery. He didn't have to have a second surgery, thank goodness, but it still was one more episode of just really hitting us over the head. I feel like it was just really hitting us over the head around, we have to make sure we're not only doing this for ourselves, me and my husband, but we actually have to start doing this and helping our kids with it too. So we're in the thick of it, you guys. Like, I don't have any sage advice about all the steps that we've taken in the last 6 weeks. We're noting things that we do need to take steps on. We have made a few phone calls to our financial planner and started initiating some conversations. My husband and I have had conversations, but we're really just in the thick of really beginning stages, especially for our children, but then more so continuing the steps that we've been taking over the years and figuring out what do we need to put in place next.
Well, so I have, first of all, how is your cousin doing?
My cousin needs lots of prayers. He's in the fight for his life right now. So he needs lots of prayer.
Wow. Okay. Well, we got that. We'll help you.
We'll help you there.
Mm-hmm.
I also have more questions.
She's the boss.
So what you said there about your son, when did he turn 18?
He had turned 18 in December. When we're recording this, it's June. Actually, this all started at the very end of April. So he had been 18 for about 4 or 5 months.
So was it really surprising to you then when, I'm guessing I would have been surprised if the doctor would have said, no, your son has to sign. Were you surprised at that?
I was very surprised by that. I mean, we knew it intellectually.
Right.
But emotionally, you're not prepared this is our oldest child. So this is a whole new rodeo for us as parents. Yeah. We've just never experienced this before. Specifically, we've never experienced anything having to take our children in for serious medical needs. I mean, I'm very grateful and blessed that we have 2 very healthy children, and we've had very healthy children for 18 years. I'm so grateful that we haven't been the family that's had to navigate this forever. But yeah, emotionally, I was like, oh, wow, it was very affronting, like, oh my goodness, he is the one that has to sign. He's the one. And I knew that intellectually because at 18, he's an adult. But until you go through an experience like that, where you just see it. In fact, I took a picture of him in the pre-op, downstairs in the OR, like the little room before they wheel him back into the OR. I took a picture of him in the hospital bed signing the papers because it was a moment. It was a real moment for us to go, this is it. Like here is our adult. Here you go. And it's just hard to in an emergency situation. We had just met this surgeon 2 hours, 3 hours prior. So in the span of a few hours, we had met the surgeon who was going to be the one that took our son back and operated on him. You just have to, we have strong faith. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how else people get through it, to be honest with you, but we were looking for signs, providential signs that this was going to be okay. We were looking for comfort in our faith, and it was provided. And so we felt like we could keep making these decisions. And of course, our son was relying on us to help him make these decisions. Mm-hmm. In that moment, he did not want to be the adult, I can assure you. So we looked for that. But beyond that, it was a very short turnaround. And you're just like, here you go. Here's our son. Good luck. Let us know how it goes, because we're completely out of control in that moment.
Right. No, one of our guests we had on our show, her name's Stacey Edwards. She's an attorney. She was saying how when her kids turned 18, that was basically their gift. Like, happy birthday. Here's the paperwork. You're signing.
Yeah. So smart.
Obviously, she's an attorney, right? So
she's been doing that for a while. Yeah.
Right. And so that I remember seeing, you post about that. And I was like, to me, it was eye-opening, because it's like, he's your baby, right?
Your baby. Yeah.
He is still in high school, right?
Yeah.
And that is even like really, it's kind of just, I don't know, kind of weird, because he's still in high school and he's your baby, right? And it's just something very interesting. But something also that me and my husband were talking about is that something that maybe as kids go through high school, like when they're graduating, it should maybe be a requirement, like when they turn 18, or some type of education component in their high school years to graduate. Like,
I mean,
I don't know.
Yes, it's so eye-opening. And and our kids even go to private school, which means they do a lot of stuff like that, because they're not bound by the guidelines of public education. And I mean, you bring up such a good point. It makes me think, gosh, maybe I should present this to the school, because they actually could bring something like that in. They don't have to go through the red tape of making that request.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a good idea. But for anyone, regardless of which school your kids might be going to, I don't think we can rely on public education to do that for us, unfortunately. So it's just a conversation that we need to be having, because yes, I mean, we do have to prepare our kids. And I would have never thought about this. I remember when I was getting married and when I was getting out on my own, my mom had worked in insurance for a good part of her life. And all of our parents do the best they can with the information that they have, with the experiences that they've been through. And at that point in her life, I feel like she thought, and it was very good advice, but she thought the best advice she could give me, which we did take, was she told me, she said, get a life insurance policy. You have to have life insurance. So I have had life insurance that I have been paying for on my own ever since getting out of my parents' house. I mean, probably after I turned probably 21, I've had insurance. When my husband and I got married, I asked him, do you have life insurance? And he did not. And so I got us life insurance. And we've had life insurance now. In the beginning, when we were in our 20s and dead broke, we had enough life insurance that would take care of a funeral and we didn't have any assets to worry about, but it would be something that would just take care of services and the financial responsibility of services, so that a grieving family didn't have to dig into their pockets. As we've gotten older and as we've gained more assets and as we've gained a lot more liabilities, our life insurance has dramatically increased. And especially for my husband, because but this is a conversation that we had recently, but we've always carried more life insurance on him because he travels a lot. He's on a lot of airplanes. He's meeting clients and he's just gone a lot. And so in our rational brain, we thought it made sense for him to have more life insurance. Recently, we have revisited that conversation. And he said, I don't think it makes sense anymore for the hefty life insurance to be only on me. Because if something happens to you, I'm still with all the needs of this family and the liabilities and covering our assets, making sure our assets are protected. So that has been an additional conversation we've made. And so I feel like that's kind of the next step, is increasing my life insurance to meet the needs of this family. So yeah, I mean, these are conversations we've been having, and something like that is something that I've always done as an early adult. But there are many other things now that I see I want my son to know about besides just life insurance.
Yes.
And my daughter, when she gets to be that age.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up your daughter. So the next question I have for you is, we've had this discussion before in a different forum about lessons learned and relearned.
Man, do we have to keep relearning them? Oh.
Yeah, exactly. So what's your plan, or what do you think your plan is to address this with your daughter when she turns 8?
Well, I think that's almost the beauty of it all, is if you're going to do it for one, you do it for two. You don't wait, right? I don't need to wait until she turns 18. The steps that we'll be taking with our son around insurance policies and documenting bank accounts and just understanding where everything is, understanding future needs that they're going to have. Like if we're going to have the conversation with an 18-year-old, you can equally and easily have it with a 16-year-old. And so, those are the things that I know we'll be looking at. And again, we haven't taken those steps yet because this is all happening in real time as we're recording this. And so he's literally still recovering. And to be honest with you, we're recovering. Mm-hmm. It's just been a major eye-opening event in our lives. One of the things that I've been asking and seeking, again, around my faith and questioning, like, okay, why is this happening? Like when multiple things happen at one time, you have to pause and ask, okay, why is this happening? And my first thought was like, okay, what have we done to attract all this bad news? And I don't think that we've attracted bad news. I really don't believe that. I think that things do happen to get your attention. And this has been an arena that has gotten my attention in terms of the planning and what do we have in place? What do we need to do next? And so this is an active conversation happening in our house. I just was talking with my husband yesterday, and we were planning to sit down this coming week on Monday to actually take a few more steps, because we feel like the dust has settled a little bit now. We're kind of coming up for air, and I don't want to wait just because, okay, we're coming up for air. The easy thing would be, and I know this is how we have to keep relearning the lesson sometimes. Okay, well, yeah, we'll do that next week, or we'll add that to the list next month. And listen, I've done that plenty of times, right? And I don't want to do that this time around. And even one of the reasons why I agreed to this podcast is like, this is an accountability factor for me. If I've gone on a podcast saying that I'm going to do these things, this is going to be the thing that I'm going to hold myself accountable to. So it's very important that we don't wait. When things happen, look at it and ask yourself, why is this happening? What do I need to learn from this experience? And I'll just tell you, I won't soon forget being in that hospital waiting room with my family, looking at my cousin's wife and seeing the look on her face. And I feel like I needed to see that for a reason. And I hate that my cousin is going through what he's going through for me to learn that kind of lesson. That's terrible. It should not come to that. So I hope by spreading this story, I can shake somebody else awake before you have to find yourself in that situation, because I know that there's other reasons why my cousin is sick that has nothing to do with me. But in terms of my involvement, that was a big lesson that I got.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you've also faced different adversities in your life, loss and an IRS audit. How did those experiences differ from the experiences you just went through when you look at your journey of reorganization and planning?
Yes. This was earlier on in our family life. Our kids were very, very young at the time. I think our daughter was around 1 and our son was around 3 or 4. So again, this is 20 plus years ago, 20, 24, 25 years ago. And my husband ended up, it wasn't really a job loss. He made a decision to leave a company. He was an entrepreneur and had partners, and he had a different company at the time, and it became very toxic and just a very not good environment. And for the sake of his mental health and well-being, he exited that partnership, but he did so in a very dramatic fashion. So let's just call it job loss, but it's the same as, a typical job loss that someone else might go through. And then coupled with that time, which was already a kind of like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do moment. We've got these 2 kids at home. At that time, I was staying at home as a stay-at-home mom. He was a sole provider and for our family. And within a few years of that experience, it all gets jumbled together, so it doesn't really matter time frame. But season of life. Within that season of life, we also encountered and went through a very brutal IRS audit. And those experiences really, especially the IRS audit, made us realize as new entrepreneurs, as again, my husband left that business and started a new business, started the business he has now. And when we hit that IRS audit, we realized, and we were doing everything ourselves, like a lot of entrepreneurs do. We realized we didn't know what we were doing when it came to bookkeeping. And so the IRS audit was a terrible eye-opener that we did not know. It just, again, goes back to education. If they had taught some of this in school, it would have been helpful. Sometimes you get on-the-job training. Yes. And we got on-the-job training of what it means to have your finances in order in terms of a business. And that was a very, very, very painful and very expensive mistake that we spent many years paying off.
Wow.
Man, you go through something like that, it again will get your attention. And I never wanted to have that experience again. So the first thing we did was hire a bookkeeper, started getting some help, hired the CPA. We actually had a CPA at the time, but we hired a better CPA. And we really started kind of owning our business a little bit more, which was super important from a business perspective. It taught us a lot about starting to put things in place. So that's when we hired a financial planner. I think I don't know how other people think of this around hiring a financial planner. I think in my young mind, I thought, well, people who hire financial planners are people who have a lot of money, and I'm like, we didn't have a lot of money at the time. And so I didn't think we needed a financial planner. What was there to plan? There's not a whole lot of money in the bucket to work with. But that's an incorrect way of thinking. And financial planners will help people who have a very small amount of money make that money work for you. And so we started an investment strategy at that time. Again, a small investment strategy. But one of the things that saved us during that time when my husband was not working and working through starting a new business and leaving his prior company and going through what we had left in terms of severance and all of that, we had a little bit of a nest egg put aside that had come from a family inheritance. So someone else had started an investment strategy, his grandparents, and when they passed away, we benefited from it. So we didn't start that investment strategy, but we inherited a little bit of an investment strategy, which was such a blessing because there was money that sort of carried us through. Now, not all the way through, but it was an eye-opener that like, oh, we need that, So once we were able to get back on our feet, that was one of the steps that we took was we hired a financial planner. We started making the small amount of money work for us. And we started having conversations, getting educated, looking at different investment strategies. And we had a great financial planner. He's still with us to this day, who has given us different stages of things that we need to look at. Because this is what you guys always talk about. Like you start here and then you keep planning. Once you get one, your foundation's built, then you can look at building the next level of the house or whatever it is, or putting up the walls and putting on the roof and all that. So over the years, we've stair-stepped our way through there. But that's kind of where we came from and what we've done over the last 20 years. Again, this most recent story has been, I think it's easy to get complacent, and we definitely had. We had definitely gotten complacent and kind of trailed off on some of those planning items. And this was a wake-up call to get back into action in that regard.
Yeah. Wow. And I love the house analogy.
Yes. Well, I wonder where I heard that from.
I have a question. It has to relate to the IRS audit. How did did a notification come in the mail? I always wonder, did it come knocking at your door?
Certified letter in the mail.
Oh,
yep.
Wow.
Certified letter in the mail. And at first it was for 1 year of taxes. And once they got into 1 year, they realized how terrible we were. And they were like, oh, I think we're going to audit you for a second year. And they did. And the bill kept adding up. I can talk a little bit more flippantly about it now. I'm not going to lie to you guys. This has been one of the most profound driving forces for me, truly, as a business leader. I do things now to make sure that that never happens again. And it also is about having, just liquid cash, like money and savings, because we didn't have that liquid cash to pay that bill. And that bill was roughly about $40,000. I would just be very open with you. And again, to a young couple with 2 young kids at home, we didn't have $40,000 in liquid cash. And so that was a payment plan to the IRS for many, many years. $425 a month. I'll never forget it. For $425 a month, you pay that every single month. It reminds you, you don't ever want to do this again. And so it got us into action. I look back on it now and again, why did this have to happen? Well, you kind of needed to get your stuff in order, girl. That's why it had to happen. And so it was a terrible experience that I wouldn't wish on anyone else. But again, it was what had to happen to get us into action. And it continues to fuel me to this day because I want to make sure we're protected, Yeah.
Wow. So thank you for sharing that and being very vulnerable about that. We appreciate that.
We do.
What advice would you give to someone who's currently facing significant challenges and feels overwhelmed by the need to plan and reorganize?
It can feel really overwhelming. I know I felt overwhelmed in the beginning when I didn't feel like we had anything in place. And so I think the best advice I would say is get some advice. I don't think that when you're in the thick of it, and especially because my husband and I were not and are not to this day financial professionals. We have not been trained. We have not been educated around financial systems. We've had to learn and get a little bit more educated over the years. But to this day, I'm not in a position to give someone else financial advice. So my advice would be get some advice. My advice would literally be call somebody. My husband and I were talking about this actually just yesterday because we are having these conversations right now. And in the grand scheme of things, our pot of money is still pretty small. The financial advisor that we have had, he actually just retired and he got bought out by a much larger financial institution. And so we're at a crossroads with our financial planner because we were saying, well, we could just stay with them and just get the guy that's been assigned to us. But they manage such large portfolios. They're really wealth managers. And our portfolio is small compared to that. And so I was saying to him, I said, but there are financial advisors out there who do focus on small business owners, who do focus on small portfolios. And that's where our financial planner was when we went to him. But again, he has just retired. So we're in a state of transition with him as well. So this is a good opportunity for us to go back and look for a new financial advisor that's going to be more focused on helping people like us who are not, just financially in that wealth category. And so I think that that's just an important thing for people to hear, that you don't have to have a bunch of money to get started. You can have a mess. And that's even more of a reason to get started. We had a financial mess for several years during the audit and post-audit. It took us a little bit of time to get unwound from that. But we would have never got unwound from it unless we had not, number one, sought out a financial planner and advisor who could help us. And then number 2, get that bookkeeper. So that might be the first 2 places I would suggest people go. But there are people you could, certainly listening to a show like this is very helpful. I know you guys have a lot of things and tools that you can help people with. I would just encourage somebody to have that conversation because you can't do it on your own.
Yeah.
Especially when you're having life events happen and you're overwhelmed already. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear. So much fear. Oh my gosh, I was so fearful during that IRS audit. I just was convinced they were going to cart us off to jail and I was never going to see my kids again. And it's just
That's a fear. Yes.
Very scary.
And that's what the IRS wants you to think. That's what they do want you to think that they're going to do that. And that was really what was coming at us, which in the grand scheme of things, like I know $40,000 is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, those pennies on the dollar to the IRS, they didn't care about us. They were never going to card us. We were not doing anything illegal. We had crappy books. So in the grand scheme of things, I have like perspective on it now. But in the moment, oh yeah, I was fearful and I was believing the lies that they were telling me. And so when you have that fear, you need someone else to give you truth. You need someone else who doesn't work for the IRS, who doesn't manage your portfolio. It needs to be somebody, a third party, who's going to absolutely tell you the truth and give you some perspective and some sound advice.
Yes, that's important.
Yes.
We always say that when you're planning, try to do it when you're clear of mind and you're not in that moment.
Don't wait. That's what I'm saying. Like here we are again, kind of getting hit with something. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we need to get back to the thing that we've been doing for the last 20 years and just step up our game again, because we did get started out of a state of a kind of a tailspin. And it was difficult. And I would definitely agree with your advice, Santiago. Do it while you're clear of mind, not when things hit the fan, if you will.
Exactly.
Wow.
So, April, thank you so much for sharing your powerful story and your insights. Your resilience, your empathy is very inspiring. Yeah. Not only to us, but I know a whole bunch of people. So thank you.
You're welcome. And as y'all know, I work in the world of storytelling, and I feel like it is important to share these stories for the reason that it might help somebody else. So I'm happy to share our story for that reason, because if I could prevent someone else from an IRS audit, or, I can't prevent other people from getting cancer or things like that. But I do know that if you had all of your ducks in a row and you had your affairs in order, those scenarios don't compound and feel so scary in the moment.
Exactly.
Right. Well, I just want to say thank you for your vulnerability and sharing. This is, again, very inspiring for people to hear. And so to our listeners, remember that even in the face of all these challenges and adversity, thoughtful planning can definitely help you navigate and overcome challenges. You'll still have that fear, I'm sure, but at least the planning part, you can kind of have an ease at that part. So, April, is there anything else you'd like to share before we end?
No, I really do believe that planning is key. Planning does not come to me by nature. Like, that's not how I'm wired, but I have become a very detail-oriented planning person over the years. And when you are prepared, right, like you can manage things so much better. So preparation is a safety net that I think everyone should build. So go build that safety net, go build that, you're going to have moments in your life where you are free falling. So having something that's going to catch you in the moments that something like somebody having brain surgery or going into unexpected surgery of any kind, or having some financial difficulties because of job loss or massive debt that might come your way unexpectedly, any of those situations, if you have things in that safety net, it feels a lot better to navigate through those turbulent times.
Yes. Will you share with our listeners how they can connect with you?
Sure. The easiest way to connect with me would be through my business, Lightbeamers. I am on social media in terms of LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. Those are really easy places to connect with me. And an easy place to find me is through Lightbeamers. And so you can come check out our work in the world around storytelling and visibility. And it's been a pleasure to get to help Honey and Santiago with a little bit of that. Even this podcast I'm super proud of you guys for this podcast, because getting your podcast out into the world is helping so many other people by you sharing the stories that you're sharing on this show.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. So, to our listeners, as you think about April's story, let's reflect back on the essential question. How can facing adversity inspire deeper action and thoughtful planning in your own life?
Well, until next time, remember every chapter you write today shapes your legacy tomorrow. Thank you for joining us at Thoughtful Planning. And just like the vibrant hues of a setting sun, we're wrapping up another episode of Thoughtful Planning. Every shared story and insight is a step closer to turning uncertainty into celebrations of preparedness.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, remember that every surprise that comes our way is an opportunity to grow, adapt, and learn. Stay tuned for more stories, expert insight, and of course, a touch of wit in our next episode.
We're not just co-hosts, we're fellow travelers on this journey. For more information on additional resources, which will help you take the next step in planning, look for the link in the show notes for our membership. Join us next time for another episode of Thoughtful Planning. Until then, keep living, laughing, and loving every moment.